Tohono Nation. I'm excited today to be here in Phoenix, Arizona, and very excited about this interview that I'm about to have with this young man today. I'm excited where we're at. We're at the Arizona State University. I'm excited, our cameraman is excited, and Mr. Moore is excited that we'll be talking to him pretty soon. So I'm glad you can join us today, and those of you are watching in other states or perhaps in urban areas, but welcome to our show. So again, like I said, I'm very excited. I'm very excited about our guest who has accepted our invitation to be on our show, and so without further ado, I want to welcome Mr. Jacob Moore, and thank you, Jacob, for accepting our invitation to interview for your position here at ASU, and also what you've been doing for the past I don't know how many years, but we'll go ahead and get into that. So I want to first start off by go ahead and having you introduce yourself and what your position is, and we'll go into asking questions.
Right. Well, it's good morning. My name is Jacob Moore. I'm the Associate Vice President of Tribal Relations for Arizona State University. I'm an enrolled member of the Tohono Nation. I come from the Chukukuk district. My grandmother came from Pozo Verde, so she was actually from the other side of the border, and then my grandfather was from Gila River. This is on my father's side, Josiah Buck Moore, and who had been chairman at the nation back in the 80s, early 90s. My mother is from Montana. She's Lakota Dakota, so she was born and raised on the Fort Peck Reservation in northeastern Montana, and her mother, my grandmother, is from Cheyenne River in South Dakota, which is where the Lakota side. So I'm 4/4, Hakmiratam, Tohono, Lakota, Dakota, got it all covered. And but I grew up in Sells, and we moved to Sells. My dad went to school here at ASU in the late 50s, early 60s. So my parents met. My mother was going to school down here at Cook School. They met here, and so we moved to Sells, and I started first grade there, and I went to Indian Oasis Babakibri, and well, Indian Oasis first, and then finished my junior high and started at Babakibri in high school, and then we moved to Tempe. So, but I've been around the valley ever since. My wife is from Salt River. I live in the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. I've worked out there in the past, but to your question, my role as the Associate Vice President of Tribal Relations is in the Office of Government and Community Engagement, and my primary responsibility is to oversee our relationship, the university's relationship with tribal nations and communities, both locally, nationally, globally. The university is so large that we have a lot of partnerships and research and training for Native students, whether it's with Navajo or San Carlos or Southern California tribes. We've done some work with the Morai, the Maori from New Zealand, and so it's a lot of different things.
You have a very, looking at your resume, we could probably talk about every one of your success stories, and you've been very successful, and we can probably, like I said, go into those. And I know you've done banking, you've done consulting, you've had your own business, you've been partners with various groups, and also been involved, sit on various committees, who had very important roles. And also too, if our viewers don't know, you used to sit on our gaming board as well. But now, after all these years being here, and what can you tell our viewers that as an Tohono member, what was important to you to take this position?
What was important to me is that there is an opportunity for both Native students, any student, whether they're in elementary or junior high or high school, to think about higher education. And historically, when we used to think about higher education, say in the 50s or the 60s, in some ways, I think that there was some concern if you came from a tribal community about what you would learn in college. Does it make you less Native? Because in some ways you're learning in an education system that's not ours, that's not our own. We can spend a lot of time talking about BIA schools and indoctrination and all of those kinds of things, but I think to me what was really exciting about being here is that, that the university is now in a position where it recognizes the importance of Native people being able to go to higher education and create opportunities of their own making that honors and respects where they come from and who they are as O'odham people or as Native people. You can come here and take American Indian Studies or some of our other institutions. You can take the O'odham language. In some ways, you can become more Native, in terms of understanding who you are or where you come from, particularly for those that go to urban communities and sometimes are still trying to figure out, what their connection is to their own tribes. But you can still do those traditional programs too, whether you want to go into engineering or into kind of classic education. But it's such a great opportunity for us now to be able to say that Arizona State University respects the culture and the values and the systems of our own communities, and that you can come here and do your work and in many ways develop those kinds of skills that you can use at home. Where you can go to other institutions and then come back and apply it, but it may not necessarily have that same kind of sense of place and space in terms of who you are and where you come from.
So the new president, the president, Mr. Crow, says this is the new American University. And so do you feel that that the universities, not just ASU, but U of A and NAU, has taken a different approach as far as Native American in regards to education?
Yeah, it's this tagline of New American University. I was joking one day and said, can we just add New Native American University to it and call it our own? The answer was no. But I think, So ASU in general, especially under President Crow, my undergraduate degree is in finance, and I have an MBA. And as you mentioned, I had worked in banking, and so in some ways I have a tendency to kind of look at organizations structurally from a business perspective, and the university has really become quite transdisciplinary. Number one in innovation. But it's this idea that it all fits together. It's all holistic, which is very much a traditional concept. That it isn't just healthcare, it just isn't education, it isn't just engineering. We have all of the elements in our traditional understandings of how things are related to one another. So this concept behind the New American University follows that same model, where you can come here, and if you want to pursue economics, but you also want to incorporate art, or you want to incorporate technology into your degree, you can do that. It's a little bit hard for some of our faculty that come from a traditional university, because they may have been in the Department of English, and so they only know where they kind of fit within that college. But here, they kind of have to find their place, because our centers have these really kind of interesting names around School of Social Justice and Transformation, which in many ways is a liberal arts college. Science and technology, that in a traditional university would be geology as one school.
Right.
Astronomy as another school, where here you're expected to be able to pull all of that together. And for me, that's the fun part, is because, like you said, I've had a diverse background in terms of some work in education, some work in healthcare, some work in business, some work in tribal government. So I don't know if, for me, I just have a tendency to kind of be all over the place. This is a perfect place because I like that chaos in terms of being able to pull different things together. And also for me to be able to inform, given whatever my background was in terms of where can I be most useful to
Right.
my interest in assisting tribal nations, that this is the best place for me where I can reach into the Indian legal program, or reach into the construction in Indian country program, or reach into some of our existing programs and make those connections with individual tribes to build their own capacity, to help educate their own teachers or educate their own engineers, and whatever we can do to facilitate that, which in the long run, with the goal of help strengthening tribal nations and strengthening tribal sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. So Jacob, on the Tohono Nation, just this past month, we graduated a number of students from Tohono High School, Bubba High School, Ashran.
Preparatory.
Yes, and thank you for that.
Sure.
Some have already signed with junior colleges or even universities. What can you tell those students who are still in limbo about what ASU has to offer?
So I would say that what we try and focus our attention on is to ensure that every student is taken care of. I'm a grandparent and, have grandchildren. We have a granddaughter that's 16 that, we've kind of raised her since she was a baby. And so when I was on the State Board of Education, she was my anchor in terms of decisions that I, was considering in education in the state of Arizona. My question is, how does this affect my granddaughter? It's the same, I think, in terms of thinking about when we have parents that drop their kids off here for the first time and sometimes come from very rural communities, and it's their first time in really an environment that can be pretty overwhelming. Not just the culture shock in terms of coming from a Tohono community into the mainstream, but also just the sheer size and scope, and we have smaller campuses. We have the Poly campus, our East Valley campus, and we have the West campus, which are really kind of nice, quiet campuses, smaller, ratio in terms of, the class sizes, ratio to teachers to students. We have the downtown campus that has kind of a downtown vibe, I guess would be the word for, the programs that we have there. But really, the expectation from President Crow to Dr. Brayboy, who is the special advisor to the President of American Indian Initiatives, to myself as the Assistant Associate Vice President, it's a more recent title change, but also we have a director of the Office of American Indian Initiatives. And our overall marching order is to recruit Native students, as many as we can get in the door, and how many presidents of colleges are saying that,
right?
But also to retain them, to ensure that they stay with us and that we get them through that first year and that second year, because that's when they're most vulnerable. If they get past that, then they're most likely going to graduate. And then the third is to graduate them in a timely manner. We don't want them on the 10-year plan. We want them in and we want them out. But with a degree that has real value, a degree that, kind of reflecting back on this idea of if not every student wants to go back to their own community, maybe they're going to work for Intel or something like that, but if they are returning home, then how can we ensure that the content within their program, for the price that they're paying, is going to give them the kind of tools to use when they return back to their own community to be most effective.
I guess that's what you mentioned as far as coming from the rural communities, who's never left the reservation, probably have gone to Tucson or Casa Grande,
right,
as far as they've seen the other world. And so, as you know, we live in two worlds, and so Western culture and also and our culture. So there's a certain challenge there, an impact on those that have never and left the reservation. It sounds like the college have began to understand that kind of challenge in regards to students coming here.
Right.
So can you elaborate more on that? What the university can do as far as those kind of challenges, those that have never left buddies there, and all of them who've always lived in one of our communities, let's say Pisinamo or Guwang, and say, wouldn't come here, said, and probably maybe perhaps was raised by their grandparents, and it was maybe a difficult decision to leave and get an education. But so what can you tell us about that?
So a couple of things. One, in terms of how we do our programming, is that we have really kind of 3 steps to encourage, Native students to consider going to college, or let them know that this is something that they can do. One is that we do a program called Recharge, which is a 1-day college and career readiness for Native students, and we had it's in the spring, and we invite Native students from schools that have Native students from both tribal communities, urban communities, those schools that are kind of on or near reservations, and so we had 500 that attended our 1-day session. We actually had 700 that had applied. So we know that the demand is out there. We just didn't have the capacity to hold a space that that could hold 700 students and do a good job. And so we limited our registration for that program to 500. And then we started a new program, a summer program called Inspire. And Inspire is a 1-week summer bridge program, not different than Upward Bound was one that I think most people are familiar with, where high school students can come stay in the dorm for a week and just get a feel for what a campus is like, and also see themselves, walking around campus and being in a classroom, and you really begin to understand that if they've never been through that experience, that they can do that. And then the third is Spirit. So Spirit is a program that is a 2-week orientation for an incoming freshman, first time, that because we require that our students live in the dorm their freshman year, because they're more likely to graduate if they start out in the dorm than get an apartment off campus. There are some exceptions, but the expectation is that an incoming freshman coming straight out of high school would live in the dorms. And so we bring them in 2 weeks early, so they can find their room, so they can get their books, so that they can kind of ease into it, so they're just not thrown in the deep end on the first day of school and they're trying to find their classroom or just get themselves situated. It's a scary experience regardless of which campus you go to, whether it's tribal college, community college, or university. I went through that same experience, and just getting out of the car and taking that first step out of the parking lot onto a campus scared me. And because I wasn't always a good student in high school. And so, we try to act like we don't think it's a big deal, but it does hurt when you don't do well, that you somehow failed, not to other people, to yourself. And so this idea of going back to school or to school really requires a lot of courage to make that first step. So anything that we can do to kind of help ease a student into that environment. Then once they're here, we have American Indian Student Support Services. So we do have someone at each of the campus dedicated to providing that academic advisement, but also just to check on them. And if they're not involved in a club or organization, then they should be, because then that helps them to meet friends. And people get lonely when they leave their home for the first time. And so the more that we can get them into a student organization or get them involved in campus. We have about 14 American Indian student organizations, from ASUS to Native American Business Organization to IICSA, which is for graduate students. And so we want to get them engaged on campus and be around students that are really working hard and wanting to be successful. That was my own experience. Once I really developed my own confidence about my own education, career or path, is that I was in the honors program, barely. I was in the honors program, but I was around students that were high achievers. And when you're around other students like that, that just makes you work harder, because you can see that what others are willing to do, the kind of dedication it would take to, it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But that doesn't mean that you're not capable. You just have that determination and some strategies around making yourself successful, and then we just try and clear the path to help them along the way.
When I left the reservation, one thing I had to get over was my shyness, which is also a challenge.
Right. Me too.
And especially if you never dealt with other minority groups or American.
Right.
And you just don't know how to interact with it. And
Right.
Are some of these programs that you mentioned help in that area of getting out of your...
Right. There's kind of different levels of that, because in some ways, it's probably not the best term, but it's integration and segregation to a certain degree, but kind of self-segregation, where we have a tendency to want to be, with our own,
Right.
which is not a bad thing. But at the same time, we also have to exist in this bigger world. This idea of two worlds, that, we live in our own communities, but then we also have to interact in these non-tribal communities. And so in some ways, I think that we try and strike a balance between, here's our American Indian Student Support Services, and we're here to help you, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get involved within your own college. If you're in nursing, then obviously you should be around those students that are in nursing that may not necessarily be Native, because they can help you with your tutoring or help get you on your track to get your degree. In some ways, we can put them in a bubble and kind of try and protect them and say, we'll take care of you, but we're not helping them in the long run, because we're not getting them out there. And in some ways, I think what we're seeing in some of our programming, where maybe we have more students that were like in our American Indian Studies, or some of our programs are a little bit more specific to where they come from, but also the idea that in some ways they're not as rigorous as, say, biology or chemistry or engineering, is that we're seeing more of our students that are kind of, I guess I would say, letting go of the edge of the pool, where it's safe, and kind of going out in the deeper waters. And so they might be minoring in American Indian Studies, but they're majoring in economics, or they're majoring in engineering. So they're starting to, once they get comfortable, they're starting to go into these more challenging programs, but they always know where the edge of the pool is. They can always come back when they need that kind of support.
With yourself, have you kind of thought about some new ideas in regards to, I'm sure we have, different, come from different tribes,
right,
and different cultures and how we see things, but
right.
Do you have any thoughts on that, as far as any ideas that you brought to the university, as far as, there should be some different treatments or different programs, that this could be good for the Tohono students or Navajo students, or
right. Yeah, Navajo is our largest, numbers, although it's not over 50%. At one time it probably was, but we have over 200 tribes that are represented. We have 2,800 American Indian students that are, attending ASU currently, which is a big number, but, we would say the largest of any major university. There are some probably, Gallup UNM campus probably has more students, but it's not it's in their Gallup campus, and probably predominantly Navajo students. But in terms of major universities, Stanford or UCLA or other universities don't have the kinds of numbers that we do, including faculty. We have over 30 American Indian faculty in any number of areas. But I think the first one is this something that faculty had requested. There was a Provost Native American Advisory Committee who wanted the university to acknowledge, our Native students, because they thought it was important that it come from the top. And so, to their credit, and to President Crow's credit, is that he issued a statement. And the statement that came out of the President's office says that you are on the ancestral lands of people that lived here before the university was here, or even, the early settlements, kind of the western expansion. And so this acknowledgement that this is the ancestral lands of a number of tribes, but particularly the Akmiratam and the Pipash. And so it was a memo that's been shared with all of the deans and all of the colleges to remind them that they're all responsible for the success of our students. So for me, I think as a Native student, particularly if I was an incoming freshman and worried about a campus is large and whether they would respect who I was or where I came from, is that it starts at the top. And this president for this university has said that you are important, to our community. And it's helpful for me in my job in many ways, the fact that we have an assistant vice president, associate vice president, or a special advisor demonstrates that President Crow has made it clear that they are important, and we're held accountable for that. But more importantly is that in our own roles in terms of meeting with deans of the individual colleges when there is an issue or a challenge, we can always bring out that letter and say,
right.
if you don't think it's important to take care of some of our kids that are in your program, then talk to President Crow because he thinks it's important. Right. And so it's filtered throughout the organization. So that's at one level. But I think for Native students, that it's important to kind of break down who are our students, because in many ways, the incoming freshmen may be straight out of high school, but we also have a lot of students that are coming back, myself included. There are many of us that, some of the research would suggest that we don't drop out, we stop out. We might start as freshmen, but then life happens, or we have family to take care of, or there's things at home that where there's need there, and so sometimes you have to kind of leave school, but then you come back. And so we have a lot of students that, one, are older students, but also probably close to half of our students come from tribal colleges and community colleges. Mm-hmm. So for me, I went to a year straight out of high school, didn't do well, so I fit that model. Came back much later, went to Mesa Community College because I needed to go to a smaller campus and learn what I didn't know or didn't learn the first time, just to be ready to come to an ASU, to a university type environment. So I think to your question is that if students are ready, then they should go for it. But if they're not, then think about going to tribal college or community college, because you really want to make sure that you're ready, that you're prepared to do the work at that level. The worst that we can do is accept a student that's not ready, because one, they're going to start running up financial aid if they're borrowing money or scholarship money.
I think that's a very strong message that you send. You should be ready. Right. Or if you're not ready, then
get ready.
Yeah, that's a good message. What is some of the things that you're, I guess, getting that kind of message out to high school students, that you should really be prepared to come if you're on your street. This is
right. Like I said, when we do these tours, we do something called the Tribal Nation Tour in the fall, where we take some of our current students and we also take some of the ASU athletes out on a bus tour to tribal communities. And when their school year just starts, then we'll go out and we'll do assemblies at different schools and with elementary, junior high, and high school students, but also some of that. So we take students that preferably come from that community. So let's say if there's a student from the Tohono Nation, we were there about 2 years ago, and so we took some of our Tohono Nation students there to go talk to their younger nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters about considering college, and those kids get a chance to see somebody who looks like them, who's going to ASU. But it's also about making sure that they understand that even at those grades, that's when they really need to start thinking about, one, getting it in their head that they can go, but two, that they have to start doing the work then to be ready to come to a university or even to a tribal college or a community college. Because that preparation is really important, and once they understand that, then they'll do well. Back to your question about shyness, is that this is one of our challenges. When I had asked our Director of American Indian Student Support Services, when do you know, that they're in trouble? And he said, we have to kind of be a mind reader, because they won't tell you. You ask them if they're doing okay, they'll say yes, that they're doing fine, when in fact they may not be, because one, they just don't want to admit it, or again, they're shy and they're still kind of getting settled in. But once we start getting close to the end of that semester, then that's when you find out, that one, they're either having trouble paying their rent, or they're failing a class, or all of the above. And sometimes we try and catch them before they get that far, but sometimes they're so far gone that the recovery part is a challenge. So we do try and kind of have an early warning system to know when they're starting to get into trouble so that we can catch them. But again, it's actually better that that they're prepared when they get here, and then that way they won't have to go through some type of recovery process.
Right, and you touched on the financial aid and the scholarships that they get, and that I've heard some of those stories where they actually abuse some of these financial aids and don't, and spend it unwisely. Even that they're challenged, not just with the classes, or perhaps they're doing well in classes, but the challenge there, they just don't have enough money to eat on, or even if they leave off campus. But
yeah, it's there's a term for that. It's food security or food insecurity, and it's happening a lot across a lot of universities where there are low-income students that are just trying to survive. There are some universities that actually have food banks, that can provide those types of services. We have in our student support services here at the Tempe campus, we call it Bologna Friday, but we have lunch meats and bread available for free, on Fridays, and the students can come by and make a sandwich, and they have something to eat, and I mean, hopefully they're budgeting their money and taking care of themselves, but it's not uncommon that the pretty basic needs are things that we have to pay attention to. And like I said, they come in all ranges from first time away from home to older, more mature students that have families and jobs. That some of those students are pretty good about getting in here and getting out of here with a degree, because they understand what needs to be done, and so then that helps us kind of target our efforts and our energy around the ones that are most in need. And we're not the only ones that I think the University of British Columbia in the Northwest, actually in Canada, and their University of Oklahoma, University of Washington, there are a lot of good programs out there. I don't think we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. But it's helpful to kind of understand what other universities are doing in terms of helping their native students and learning from those experiences.
Right. I guess it's a matter of budgeting and the money that you get, which is also probably a challenge, but also a personal challenge.
Right.
I know on my part. So, I grew up in the 70s, and back then, 60s, 70s, 80s. So you had a lot of manufacturing plants in the United States, and had a lot of jobs. You didn't even have to have a high school diploma to work in some of these manufacturing plants, because they were all over Phoenix, and you can just apply, work on an assembly line, build whatever they're manufacturing. But most of those companies have left, and so now the dynamics of while America looks like as far as jobs is that it would seem that now you have to have a degree in order to work in an office type or some kind of business, like from San Francisco becoming more of a high-tech place to work. In those areas where it's becoming more high-tech, but also those that are graduating even from universities are sometimes even get degrees, or they even can't find a job. That's even challenging as well. So as far as American Indians, do you send that kind of share that kind of education, that times have changed and that you do need this type of degree? And I'm not saying it's for everybody, because there's also construction and other areas of that you want to go into. But I think you see that as well. Certainly America has changed to where you need some kind of that high school diploma just isn't going to cut it anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think part of it also is to think about, I guess what I think about in terms of, you had mentioned I worked for tribes, I'd been an economic analyst for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community Economic Development Analyst. I'd worked in the President's office as a Congressional Legislative Affairs, and so and then on the consulting side, for 7 years, really advising tribes and working with tribes on a variety of things. Some of it economic development related is really having a sense of the long-term future of tribal nations and communities. Mm-hmm. At that level, it's important to kind of understand your community and who your young people are and what their potential is, which is really unlimited. But being able to get them into programs, one that don't just make them successful at a personal level, but also helps with the stability of the nation, mm-hmm. Of the tribe in terms of its long-term sustainability. And so it's important for tribes as well to look beyond, where they are today, whether it's gaming or mining or timber or whatever those current jobs are within that community, but to look at the future in terms of whether they're going to get left behind or whether they're going to be able to participate. And a lot of the recent studies have suggested that 70% of the future jobs will require a 4-year degree, if not more. Mm-hmm. Most of those are technology related. President Crow's, and publicly has in events have said, if you're in a job that can potentially be automated, it probably will be. Right. And it'll be obsolete. That job will no longer be there. And so there are a whole number of industries, every day, we're dealing with something that used to require a person that doesn't require a person anymore. Whether it's getting money out of the bank, it's now an ATM machine, or there's some kind of kiosk or something that we're working with that used to be a person. So unless you have some type of advanced degree, then you're not in that job market, so you might be, we all kind of go toward something like food service work, in terms of fast foods, but even that is becoming automated. So, without that high school diploma, something beyond a high school diploma, if you're really thinking about your long-term future, then you should also be recognizing that if you don't pursue any kind of degree or technical skills, is that the number of jobs that are available to you is really small. Mm-hmm. My own personal experience is having, obviously banking was helpful, but there were times when I would look at the classified ads if I was looking for a job and go through the list, and it's like, okay, there's only like about 10 things out of this that I can do. Now that I've got both a bachelor's and a master's, if I go through that same list, of course I'm not qualified for some of those high-tech jobs, but at least I know at least 50% of what's in the classified ads I could probably do if I lost my job here tomorrow. Hopefully not, but that there are other things. So it just opens up the opportunities, and especially for a young person, maybe they want to stay home, maybe they want to go away for a while, and come back. And so with that degree, you can work in Seattle, or you can work in Singapore, or you can work anywhere around the world, and almost become home. So you just opened up the universe, and not just in terms of a paycheck, but also a quality of life, where you can go out and really do some things that maybe are not, things that you can do, at home or where you are currently.
So you kind of spoke about the tribes in regards to the future. Mm-hmm. So are you kind of saying that the tribes really needs to look and convey that as far as to their youth, as far as how the future is going to look, mm-hmm. and invest in that and mm-hmm. push those, push barbecue or push Tohono High School, that we really start to change our curriculum in that manner. Right. Is that what basically you're saying?
Yeah, it's both. It's both thinking forward in terms of how even the nation engages on a larger scale, or participates within the economies of the state or the nation, or even transnational, given that the Tohono Nation is on the border. and in Mexico as well. So what is the industry in Mexico, and how does that impact the tribe, for example? But the other also is just in terms of what, really relying on those traditional values or understandings, in the Himatag, in terms of, these are time tested. So regardless of what happens in the future, if we rely on that, that can help us in terms of maintaining as we have for centuries. But say, for example, another personal experience in terms of my MBA program was being able to go to Costa Rica. On a business class. We looked at their industries, and at one time they were extraction, they were forestry. They have jungles and amazing wildlife, and at one time they were cutting down all of their timber, and they recognized that this was not necessarily a renewable resource for them, that ultimately they would cut their timber down and it wouldn't grow fast enough to maintain their economy. So they intentionally switched to ecotourism. So as ecotourism, it's promoting that sustainability of their plants and their animals and their life, yet still are able to generate revenue and maintain a strong economy that creates jobs. And so to what degree, for me, coming from a tribal experience and listening to a former president that sounded very much like a chairperson or a chairman or a chairwoman, and their land base is about the size of a reservation, is that we can learn from those kinds of experiences in terms of how we run our own tribes, but also tying back to the students is creating these pathways for our students to go out, and the purpose of my job is MOUs and IGAs to meet with tribes about creating programs where we can focus on developing preschool teachers or early childhood, programs, or social work programs, but also embed in those programs that cultural competency, so that it isn't just a cookie cutter program, but one that is reflective of those values within that community.
Right, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think there's should be some strong investment at our early childhood, but somewhere along the line it seems to there's this very exciting adventure for these kids. Then somewhere along the line it just drops off.
Right.
And
you lose them.
Right.
Right.
And so there needs to be something there to continue to give them that excitement,
right,
to prepare for the future.
And there's a really kind of sobering statistic that we use when what we suggest. I mean, in terms of speaking, sometimes where we say, well, let us set the context in terms of where we are and what we're doing, is that Dr. Brayboy's research in the Center for Indian Education, in the simplest terms, is that if you take 100 Native students and they start the 8th grade together, of the 100 students, 60 of them will finish high school. And of that 60 that finished high school, 15 to 20 of them will go on to some form of higher education, either career tech or community college or university. And of that 15 to 20, 7 of them will get a bachelor's degree. And then of that, less than 1% would get a PhD or a master's degree. Of that 100 kids that started out as freshmen in high school together, we lose 90% of them.
Wow.
That don't get a bachelor's degree. So it's good to have this 2,800 students, but that means that's that 7. That we're losing a lot of our young people along the way. And that doesn't mean that they're not out there doing something really interesting and good and maybe being productive, but they've missed out on that opportunity, or they're missing out on that opportunity. So how do we capture that 90%? How do we get half of that 90% to go to college and then come back to their communities?
I think that the tribes probably have done various things, reorganizing and bringing in other people and hiring other people, but somewhere along it just doesn't seem to work.
Right.
And so there has to be something there that's some kind of.
Yeah.
I know that Tohono, the nation, is possibly on the verge of taking it over to BIA schools.
Right.
Which could give them opportunity, but I think that that needs to be really looked at, and not just become, like I said, another cookie cutter.
Right.
And something. Although there's, talked about the cultural, talked about language. Other tribes still trying to hang on to their language, but times are changing. So know your language, pretty your awesome language. But of course that's a challenge in itself as well. So our autumn students, we're always echoing, well, they need to become doctors, they need to become engineers, and so forth, or even attorneys. And I know there's there's a scholarship there that was created. Your dad, I think it's a 2000 scholarship, the Josiah Moore scholarship to assist in this area. So those autumn young students that would want to come here. So what kind of curriculum are we looking at here for? I mean, I'm sure you have a vast amount of.
Yeah, I think now I've told people that my work in terms of coming here so that we can help develop engineers and lawyers and teachers, and that person reminded me that don't forget arts and music.
Right.
There's so many ways that we can create opportunity that maybe it is engineering, but maybe it's architecture or something else. Those programs are all available. I think your question really is two parts. One is the financial requirements, and then two, just the variety that's available here. We have something called Me3. Me3 is, if you Google it, you can bring it up, but it's a survey. It's a questionnaire, but the questionnaire is in pictures. And it's geared toward 8th graders. So any 8th grader can log on, create an account, and you go through a series, I think, of about 60 pairs of pictures. And you pick one picture over the other in terms of what, whichever one you think you like better than the two pictures. And at the end, it'll give you some indication of what kind of career opportunities you might be interested in. So it'll tell you if there's an old Briggs test, I think is what it used to be called, but it's a way of, based on who you are and how you think and what you like and what you don't like, are you more suited to be a scientist, or are you more suited to be in entertainment or hospitality? So it's kind of an interesting tool because it gives a young person an opportunity to, just based on that model of going through a series of pictures, some indication of what kinds of careers they might want to think about.
Right.
And that puts them on the path to say, well, and it gives some options to you. So it also tells you, well, these are the classes that you have to take if this is something that you're interested in pursuing. So we're trying to catch them early in terms of thinking about, okay, here's the 8 or 10 classes if you wanted to go into that field. Because this response is based on your response in terms of what, without really knowing that that's what you're doing, is that apparently these pictures are able to kind of decipher, what your interests are, and what you might be good at. And so that's one. This issue of scholarship is a challenge because tuition continues to increase as the state has really been less supportive. At one time, the state of Arizona put significant dollars into its universities,
right,
and they're doing less of that. And so in many ways the university is having to make up for that money in other ways. And when you look at the volume, that's one way of doing it. And ASU and other universities are doing that, where our enrollment has gone from 50,000 to over 100,000, probably in about 8 years. That's when the light bulb went off for me in terms of this is why we were encouraged to bring in as many Native students. And so, we need to take advantage of that opportunity, but what the university is doing is supplementing the cost of an in-state student with out-of-state tuition or international students who are paying twice as much. So the amount that we charge for tuition is actually less than what it actually costs us for that student. So why our current tuition is $12,000, the program is actually cost more than that. So if an international student or out-of-state is paying twice that much, or roughly 24,000, then we're using that money to supplement our in-state students. President Crow would suggest that we are, the average in-state student doesn't pay that $12,000 retail price because once you do scholarships, then you can bring down that number significantly. You might still have some financial aid, but again, I think that's where we can certainly do a better job in terms of helping students apply for scholarships.
Right.
Given my experience in terms of what I tell students is that going to college, what you learn in the classroom is 50% of what you need to know when you go to school. That other 50% is just knowing how to get through your own tribal scholarship office, how to get through financial aid, how to get an apartment, or to know what courses you have to take in order to finish a particular program or degree. Is that there's a whole lot of learning that happens outside of the classroom that you have to know. And for me, as an older, more mature student, is that I went after every scholarship that I could get my hands on. So I think in the 5 years in my own undergraduate program, I probably got about $25,000 in scholarship total because it's out there and our students aren't applying for it. There's a lot of scholarships that go unused. Certainly we do the distribution in terms of the Josiah Moore Scholarship once a year, but there's all kinds of foundations and others out there that would fund a Native student in a minute. All they have to do is apply for it. I still ended up borrowing some money. I did some financial aid, especially for my master's program. The nation paid for basically about half of it, and I borrowed for the other half. That's the other thing that we don't do is we don't borrow. We have a tendency not to borrow money. As a former banker, I can tell you that there's nothing wrong with borrowing money. That you get to spread that payment over time. Financial aid really is inexpensive in terms of the interest rate. I'm still paying on my student loan, and I'm not at all worried about it. One, because I can afford to pay for it. Two, it's a low interest loan. But the other is that, I spent about $30,000 in financial aid is a figure that people buy cars for that amount, and all they get is something to ride around in, and eventually it's going to break down. But for that $30,000, I get to do what I do now, and I can afford to pay that back. So.
I guess that's a positive way of looking at it, in terms of that you make an example of buying a car and more, or so. You're buying your education,
your future, right?
Yeah, your future,
right?
But I think it's that what you mentioned about what you call it, Me3. Young people that are still in high school. I said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I don't know. I haven't decided, but I know there's some of them, probably a minority of them, really know what to do already,
right? And
they have well, I already know what I'm going to do, and so kind of have their future outline. But there are some that just are totally lost, and I guess that's a good way of finding out what should I go into, but also it falls on how the future looks for America, what jobs are going to be obsolete, like you mentioned, and of course. I think being a doctor or nurse, the medical field is always going to be there. Medical industry, probably some other things you probably already know about what's going to be there. But also I think every human being is gifted in what they can do. I'm sure you found yourself along the way that you're gifted in various areas. So,
and it wasn't until later. I think I was in that same situation where I didn't really know what I wanted to do, it's hard to go to school when you don't know why you're taking algebra, or it's like, well, how is this going to help me in the future? But I think once I did figure out what I want, it was just laser focused on getting in and getting out, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And that it is helpful, for students to, have something put in front of them that says, here's, here's some ideas, here's some platforms. The college and career readiness or Common Core in high school, because some of this, I think we can do what we can at the higher level, but the higher ed would blame the K through 12, and K through 12 would blame the early childhood for not preparing that student along the way. But if we look at the K through 12 system, then there's a lot that we can do there to help that preparation in terms of helping students think about their future, so that when they have that opportunity to continue, then they have a pretty good idea of what where they can go with their future. Say, for example, with the tribal nation, that they have a pretty good sense of what's available, or as a student know what's available. Under college and career readiness, it's this idea of higher mathematics and higher science. And so I was on an advisory committee that was trying to explain this to some tribal leaders. And somebody from one of the more rural tribes said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's this idea that technology is going to drive future jobs, that jobs will become obsolete, and so it's really the country in many ways of preparing our young people for where the future is going. And so I said it's engineering, it's coding or whatever. And so her response back to me was, so then now what you're telling me is that my children will not come back to my community, because if they come to engineer, they become an engineer, we don't have any engineering jobs here. They'll go to Intel in Chandler and they'll live in Phoenix, and they're not going to come back to our community. I didn't have a good answer at that moment, but then after I had a chance to think about it, I know that where tribes are really strong is in natural resources and environmental protection.
Right.
And there are engineering jobs there, within your own communities, whether it's protecting grasslands or waterways or cultural resources, the sacred sites, that there are opportunities where you can get these advanced degrees and come back into tribal communities.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There is a lot of opportunities there that are vacant positions, veterinarian,
hydrology, right?
Yeah,
right.
And
we're hiring non-native people to do that.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right.
I think that's the message where we're okay. Go out and get education and come back, but there's always that message. Well, what am I going to come back to? One of the things that I thought about was that when we were talking about making a choice as far as careers, is that as far as being a doctor or engineer, biochemist, or whatever, is that living on the reservation, you don't see a whole lot of those people. You're not exposed to. The only thing you're exposed to really is going to the doctor, going to the hospital, but very seldom do you go there. But you never think about it. Well, I want to become a doctor or a nurse. But they also see police officers. So there's a very limited amount of professional people you're exposed to. So you really don't think about those things. Is there any thought to that as far as exposing that kind of?
Yeah, and there's obviously things that we haven't done. That I appreciate. Kind of the question, because it's some things that we think about but maybe aren't in place yet. Is that one of the things that we could do better, whether it's here or U of A or other institutions, is really tapping into our alumni. Because our alumni are out there, they're in those roles and they're in those positions. And oftentimes they're more than willing to give back, but nobody's asking them. And so one of the things that I've been spending more time on is a couple of things. One is internships in terms of tribal communities, being able to have our students maybe go back to their community. I know that currently the Tohono Nation is just sent out a flyer for an internship in the Attorney General's office.
Right.
So experiences like that where we can do that more formally and not just kind of randomly. I've had tribal leaders say, well, we want to hire a hydrologist. Do you have any graduates who are native, or more importantly from our community that's got their degree in engineering that want to come back and be a hydrologist. So I think the more that we can create a platform both for those that are current students, because we just graduated. How many did we have? About 370 graduates a couple of weeks ago. American Indians who got their degrees and with their bachelor's, master's, PhDs in law school. And at the fall graduation, I think we had about 250. So this year alone, academic year, we graduated probably between 500 and 600 American Indian students. It's really impressive watching them go across the stage on our American Indian convocation, but a lot of them were nervous, and some of them came to my office because they were saying, now I got to go find a job. So what can we do to have a platform where tribes can let us know what jobs do you have, and here's the list of what's available, or when they're building their resume, that they can go do those internships in those areas, and so that they kind of got their foot in the door when they're done. But I think for our alum, back to Josiah, him and Peterson Zaw and Vernon Masayesfa, who all became chairmen for their tribes at the same time, all were ASU alums. Jefferson Begay, who's with Kitchell, they reestablished the Alumni Association here, not necessarily for the social side of alumni associations, alumni chapters like tailgating and homecoming, but for the political leverage that those associations can have on the university, modeling the Hispanics in terms of Los Diablos here on campus, is that one, they were created a scholarship fund and had the university match whatever money they raised, and they were raising a lot of money to get more students, more Hispanic students, but also the idea of I can say it, you can say it, but when those that went to school here can come back and tell the president or the deans that you need to do this, they'll do it. It was something that Josiah had shared, that when, before I even came here, I never not thought that I would be at ASU, is that he said that these institutions of higher learning are there to advance the community. They're doing a classic education in terms of degrees, but if you look at these universities, they're there to support Intel, Motorola, or whatever those industries are in the Valley or in Tucson or wherever. And they should be doing that for us too. They should be doing that for our communities. So there's this kind of two-way partnership that should be occurring, right, where the university is helping building our economies. But that also means that from the tribe side that we have to kind of, one, engage with the university and also be willing to support the university with the understanding that we're supporting the students.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that that it seems that there has to be some. I'm not saying the university is already doing it, or UFA or an AU, that there has to be more collaboration with the tribes in regards to how can we help you.
Right.
You go out and you say, well, this is this is what ASU has to offer. This is what we can do.
Right.
But the tribe has to pitch in.
Right.
So, okay, this is what we'll do. To prepare our students.
Right.
And create that kind of marriage.
Right.
Which will be more successful.
Right.
But also there's a role with other industries who are tied into,
right,
as you mentioned, tied into the universities, who are contributing money to
right,
the university.
Right.
That we need that kind of working together and have a more understanding of how the tribes or as economic works, as far as we're consumers as well.
Right.
And we leave the reservation and we spend a lot of money off reservation.
Right.
So therefore we should be supporting that area of, hey, we support your Walmart.
Right. Right.
Or something like that. Currently, how many campuses? I know you have the downtown campus, downtown Phoenix, which we're just as quite a sight. And in the university here. How many campuses do you have in the Maricopa County?
In Maricopa County, we have 5, probably 4.5 in some ways, because we include Skysong. Skysong is out at in Scottsdale. And Skysong is where we have our online platform, so then we also have over 20,000 students in online classes and about 80,000 that are in regular classes. So Skysong is considered one of our campuses. In fact, we didn't touch on that, but it's more of an entrepreneurial space, which I think is other things for our Native students to think about, is that you also don't necessarily have to wait for that IHS job or that school job when you go home, and the more that you have access to broadband technology, is that you can become an entrepreneur as well. You can do your own business, graphic design or other things within your own community, and not just be dependent on whatever is available in a small community. As long as you have internet access, you could be on a global market but still live in a very rural area. So, having been an entrepreneur, I guess the other thing that I've suggested is that you don't have to just have one business, have 5 businesses. Start one, and then if you want to do something else, then start something else or sell that, and create job opportunities within your own community to hire your friends and family, but also think about maybe how you can do something else. So that's a whole other topic. But so we have the Poly campus, the East Valley campus, we have the Tempe campus, the downtown campus, the ASU West out on, I think it's 51st Avenue in Thunderbird. We also have a campus in Lake Havasu. And so we haven't really done much outreach there, but we've just been talking more recently about some of the Colorado River tribes,
right,
to see if there would be an interest in offering some classes out there that might be tribal specific.
There are some extensions. There's one in Tucson, right?
Yeah, there's one up in Oro Valley. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Is ASU considering expanding more, or as far as?
Yeah, and it's funny to we don't brag, in terms of, as Native people, we're encouraged to stay humble.
Right.
Right after the graduation, the President Crow took his top management team on 2 double-decker buses for 2 days to go visit every location and make sure that everybody knows what we have. And so I'm part of that. I get to say I'm part of that management team of the 100 top managers that work for President Crow. The paper has called him this a operational force of nature. And given my interest in always trying to put myself in a position where that I'm at risk, I kind of like the idea of challenging myself on something that I don't know that I can do it. And certainly this is one of those places, and working for Crow is one of those jobs for President Crow. But we do get to see everything that we're doing globally, not just internationally but locally. And it's kind of a running joke that someone said, well, is ASU trying to take over the world? And it's like, no, we're trying to take over the universe, because we're doing space science as well. And it's a fun place to be, because it's so I feel like a kid in a candy store, because I think any student that would come here would certainly have the opportunity to go into any field that they want, and we would have some way of supporting them and helping them through that.
I know you shared when we met this new program, this online Master of Arts in Digital Education. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, Dr. Brayboy has been really doing some interesting work in the Center for Indian Education, where we're doing specialized programs. So, like I said, any student that wants to come here can go into a regular established program, like, say, a WP Carey business degree, but we also have the opportunity to create special programs where 2 examples that were kind of the beginning of this online program is that the Pueblo in New Mexico had asked ASU if they could create a PhD for Pueblo students, and they had a grant to do that. So basically they brought their own money. But we've had 2 cohorts. Cohort is a group that goes through the program together, which means that they're more successful because they work as a team. We had graduated 10 PhDs for the Pueblos of New Mexico about 4 years ago, and then we have another cohort who's just now finishing. We have another PhD for Head Start teachers from Navajo Nation. There's about 5 in that program. So this one, and then this one I think is more related to a program that we did with Gila River, where the Department of Education has a teaching certificate in native language. You don't have to have a teaching degree, but if you're proficient in the language and the nation, the case of the Tohono Nation, the chairman gives them a letter that says you're proficient in the language. Whether you have a teaching degree or not, you can take that down to the Department of Education and they'll give you a teaching certificate in the language. So you could be an elder who's in the classroom, and before they could only get paid as a teacher aide or a teacher assistant, but with this teaching certificate they can be paid as a teacher. So what ASU has done to kind of help support that is that they created, well, Gila River started it, but Gila River started a program with South Mountain Community College, where I think they started out with 20 or 30 students from Gila River that wanted to teach the language. So they went through their freshman, sophomore year at South Mountain, and then they transferred here. And so then we just graduated, I think about 8 of them a year ago that got their bachelor's degree to be able to teach the native languages. It's not a teaching degree, but it's a degree that allows them to be language instructors, which, as you mentioned, is really important in terms of revitalization of our traditional languages. And so of that group, then some of them went on to do a master's. So we just had four students. There actually, if you know that, this is what's today, June 8th, at least on our lead page on the asu.edu website, the front story is on these women from Gila River who got their master's degree. They call themselves the Soul Sisters. But it's a program where we did, again, create a really specialized program that was supportive of Gila River in terms of getting more of their own members into teaching the native language.
Right.
So this program is an online, I believe it's a master's program that has been fully certified and is now available, for those that are moving toward a teaching degree or a degree in Indian education can do this online program. It just came out this week, so I don't have a lot of detail, but I can make sure that we have that information available for anybody that's interested in it.
What is the message that you want to give to our autumn youth that have graduated or perhaps in 8th grade, or maybe watching this, or even the parents or grandparents who may be watching this particular segment with you? And what would be the message that you want to give as far as education?
So I guess the bottom line is that education is the great equalizer. That we all understand our circumstances within our tribal communities, the high levels of poverty and substance abuse and domestic violence and things that really, we can attribute to trauma or historical trauma that, from generation to generation we've in many ways have been devastated by being placed on reservations for one thing, but any number of things that have really put us in a difficult position, both individually and personally. People struggle every day. And but on the other hand, we've been very resilient, that our elders have helped us or been the ones that have kind of set the groundwork that there's no better time than now, to recover from that. It took generations to go through that experience, but and it'll take us a few generations to work out of it, but we're on the right track. We're moving in the right direction. And so, I'm just honored to, one, be a member of the nation and to be in this role at ASU. And I don't know how long I'll be here, or who will follow after me. But in the time that I'm here, I want to invite anybody to, to come to ASU. Again, not just those young people, to think about, the fact that they need to start now in 8th grade, 9th grade, to kind of work on those grades and understand why they're going to school. Anything that we can do to help support them on that pathway to get a degree, whether it's here or anywhere else. But also to those parents and grandparents, that it's not too late, for them to come back to school as well. Anybody can go to school at any time. Learning is a lifetime thing. That we don't have to go to school to learn. We can learn something new every day. But at least here, we can help move you toward a degree. And so I'm always encouraging anyone, regardless of their age or what they're doing, to think about it, because sometimes we just need somebody to tell us, you can do it, or just give you that shove, to kind of put you in the right track. So that's what my role is here, and I would encourage anyone to reach out to me or anybody here within the university, and we can figure out a way to get them on the right track and get them in and get them back to whatever they want to do. It's about being able to take care of your family. It's about being able to take care of yourself. It's about being able to take care of your community. So we're just the pathway to help you develop the tools or the skill set to do that. But ultimately, it's really about helping you have a full life.
Well, thank you. I think that's a strong message, and certainly I think that being a member of the Tohono of the nation, and pretty from Chukutku. I mean, you're like I mentioned from the beginning. We could probably pick on some of your success stories, some of the jobs you've had before. I think that tells a lot. But also, I think it's great that anyone, as you mentioned, you have an open door policy.
We can tell our kids to go to school, but if we don't do it ourselves, then we can't set that model for them.
Right. But I also wanted to greatly acknowledge your father, Josiah Moore, who was his name echoes on various occasions that he did some tremendous work while being a leader for the Tohono of the nation, and for 2 terms, and very unfortunate that you lost him, but I think during that time I think he was involved in some of the gaming toward the end. But I just wanted to acknowledge your dad, and was very thankful in knowing him, and your mom too, and your sister at that time when you were living in South. So I just wanted to say that in respect to yourself and your family. But currently you're residing in Salt River, and which is just probably
Hatchin, down the road. So.
Right, but I want to thank you, Jacob, for the message that you've given today, and your thoughts, and also what ASU can offer our autumn students.
I want to thank you for the time to come and visit, because this is what we're doing, and appreciate your interest in trying to make sure that message gets out there that we're here.
And I hope that down the road we can do another interview.
Sure.
Like I mentioned, I think there's some things we didn't touch on, and perhaps some things you want to share in regards to maybe some new programs that the university has come up with, or even new financial aid that we can talk about. But again, thank you very much. And so, Tohono of the nation, that concludes our interview with Mr. Jacob Moore. And and again, I was very excited to be here on ASU campus. Of course, I'm a Sun Devil fan. Sorry, Wildcat fans, but but again, the message here, I just wanted to have Mr. Moore here and share some of what ASU has to offer to our young autumn, even to young autumn students, but also to some of you who are considering in their 50s, 60s here going to school. So is here, and of course he mentioned he has an open door policy. So again, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed our interview, and we'll be seeing you again. Thank you.
I stand before you as living proof of the American dream, joining many of your parents, your professors, and generations of graduates before you. Try not to rely only on what you have learned in the classroom. Summon your compassion, your curiosity, your empathy towards others, and your commitment to service. Give more than you receive, and I promise you it will come back to you in ways you can't possibly imagine. ASU is because of you. You are because of ASU. We are because of each other.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Arizona Board of Regents, on the recommendation of the faculty of Arizona State University, I hereby confer upon each and every one of you the appropriate bachelor's degree, admit you to the fellowship of educated women and educated men with all of its rights, honors, privileges, and obligations. Now, move those tassels to the other side.